Hey Eric, should we get started then? Is that all right?
Sounds good. Sounds good, Mark.
Cool. Well, listen, good evening, everybody. Let's get started properly now. So, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is about our eighth online webinar that we've done with the Campaign for Common Sense, and I'm really chuffed tonight to have Eric joining us. I'll come to a little bit more about Eric in a minute, but just to say, please do bear with us if there's any IT issues. We're getting reasonably slick at this, but if there are any problems, hang in there and stay online. Don't run away. The way the format for tonight works is like the other discussions we've done. We've got about 25 minutes of conversation between Eric and myself. I've got some questions I want to work through with him. And then at that point, we'd love to put to Eric some of the questions that you've submitted. So if you do want to ask Eric a question, please use the question and answer button that should be at the bottom of your screen. Submit a question in there, and then my colleague will pick those questions up and forward them on to me so we can get through them in the second half of the session. A little bit about the Campaign for Common Sense. For those of you that haven't been here before, we launched towards the end of May last year, and really we're just trying to be a really boring, moderate voice in some of the debates that we're having about quite difficult and sensitive topics right now. We believe that no one's got a monopoly on what is right and wrong. We think we've all got a lot more in common than sometimes it seems. We think that common sense and fair play are the best way to approach these difficult issues. And we do think that sensitive topics should be talked about, that we should do them frankly and calmly without trading insults. And we're running these sessions because it's a brilliant opportunity to get experts in their field like Eric to come along and have a conversation, not in a gotcha or sort of antagonistic way, just to try and chew some things over and try and better understand some of the stuff that's going on out there. So let's talk a little bit about Eric. He's a professor of politics at Birkbeck College at the University of London. He's a senior fellow at the think tank Policy Exchange. And I think he first came onto my radar a couple of years ago when he released a book called White Shift, looking at immigration and populism and the impact on white majority populations and countries. And it really got me thinking about some of the issues that he raised in there. And then last year, he was involved with a really interesting report at the think tank Policy Exchange called Academic Freedom in the UK, Protecting Viewpoint Diversity. And that's a topic really close to our heart here at the Campaign for Common Sense. We're really keen that whether it is in academia or in the workplace or at school or elsewhere, that viewpoint diversity is protected as a good thing in itself, because actually disagreeing is a really important part in life. Disagreeing well is even more important. And one of the areas where it seems that disagreeing well is going out of fashion and where a sort of authoritarian groupthink appears to be imposed is in our universities. And Eric's been doing some fantastic work around this. Eric, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to be here, Mark.
And it's really good to have you. And listen, I have a worry that we could probably talk about this for hours and hours and hours.
I know.
I'm going to try and be really disciplined tonight and stick to some of the questions that I mentioned to you before. But generally, I'm a real fan of yours. I'm really delighted you're here. And I'm just going to start off with that nice, easy question that I ask all of our guests, which is, when you look back at school, what was your favourite subject at school? And what was your favourite bit of school life?
Well, I liked subjects like geography and history. I was terrible at math and I was not great at science.
Oh, wow.
So, school life, I mean, I can't say it was the most delightful part of my world, but yeah, I mean, noon hour, I grew up in Canada, and, we would play ball hockey at noon hour sometimes. That was fun. So I, most of my memories are around that kind of stuff.
So actually, it wasn't so much the academic stuff, although you did that. You're saying it was the other stuff around that you really enjoyed and remember.
In school life, particularly secondary, yes. I mean, I did enjoy some of the subjects I took. I was definitely a reasonably good student. I wasn't sort of like the top, but I did enjoy it. But yeah, I think you remember more of the other things around school. So that was the case for me.
So, and yet you've ended up in academia, and I would imagine that a lot of academics tended to kind of ace their particular area of interest or field at school, and that's what like sucked them in. So what was it that attracted you to get into academia, and what is it that's kept you there then all this time?
Yeah, I really had no intention of going into academia. It kind of happened quite by accident. You know, over my lifetime, I'd applied to business school, journalism school. I've taken forestry, you know, so I've sort of bounced around a lot. And I was sort of, and then but I did wind up doing a master's degree and then a PhD in London. Initially, the master's degree was just for a year to be in Europe, you know, LSE, Let's See Europe. That was sort of what I was doing. And then I got interested in what I was studying. And then, but even when I started the PhD, it wasn't really in my mind that I was going to be an academic until like 2 years in. I thought, actually, what the heck am I going to do? And then it sort of rolled into that. So it happened very late for me. It was not something I planned from an early age, that's for sure.
And then what's kept you going then? So you decided to second, but what's kept you going all that time?
Well, you know, once academics enter the profession, you know, only small numbers tend to leave, especially if you're in the social sciences and humanities. Plus, your job opportunities are not as broad as they might be if you were in the sciences. Yeah, but I've kind of very much been interested in my subject matter, which would have been the study of nationalism, study of political demography, the politics of population shifts. These sorts of things have kind of captured my imagination, and I've got to really like the academic, you know, the research and the teaching, less so the administration. And you know, the interaction with students, even the academic conferences and that sort of thing, I've got quite a bit out of. So I think it's a good profession if you're motivated by the subject matter. It's not great if you're just doing it as a career, I think.
And what is it about those particular issues, those particular topics that have gripped you so much, such that you've made it your life's work? What is it about them?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think something like being interested in nationalism, you know, I grew up abroad. My dad was in the Canadian embassy, for example, in Tokyo. I lived a total of 8 years of my life in early life in Tokyo. So when you're at an international school, you know, every kid, and there were like 60 nationalities, so there's a day where everyone has their tent, and you know, you're just made aware of your national identity much more than if you just grew up in a country and it's just part of the air you breathe. So that was kind of the beginning of being interested in this phenomenon. And then also growing up in a city, Vancouver, like London, which has had, you know, a lot of ethnic change, that too. And I'm myself of quite a mixed ethnic background. I'm a quarter Chinese, quarter Latino. And so I kind of see the minority perspective a bit and also the majority perspective a bit. And I think that all of that stuff kind of led to my interest in these topics.
And so when you think about that, the issues that the topics, the themes, the issues that you research, does it leave you feeling optimistic that we can get to grips with some of the stuff that's being thrown up by that, or does it leave you feeling more skeptical or worried about how things are going to go?
Well, I think we are headed for a period of high political conflict and even polarization right now because of the confluence of two major things. One being this quite significant ethnodemographic shifts, which may have happened anyway, but could have been dealt with in a number of different ways, right? But at the same time as that ethnodemographic shift, so for example, Canada, US, New Zealand will all be quote unquote majority minority by around 2050, and that's likely to happen in this country towards the end of the century. So these are really big shifts when you consider that these countries have been relatively ethnically homogenous. I mean, the US is slightly different, but still, this is a big shift. And we know that these things are connected to politics. Ethnicity and politics are heavily connected in many cases. So we should be expecting some kind of turbulence. But then at the same time, you also have this new ideology, which I call left modernism. And this is a fusion of, in a way, concepts from liberalism around minority rights and concepts from socialism around oppression and victimhood and so on. And so that, with a bit of Freudian therapeutic psychology chucked into the mix. And so you've got this new ideology, and it is pushing things like multiculturalism and political correctness and so on. And it's that's happening at the same time you're getting these rapid demographic shifts. And it's the kind of confluence of those two things that leads to the polarization. So you get one part of society reacting to the ethnic change because they want to slow it down, and the other part influenced by this new ideology, which is reacting to the kind of populists and saying, oh, they're deplorable and racist and how horrible this is, and becoming almost religious about it, and then the two sort of reacting to each other. So we're kind of in that dance of, well, rather contentious dance, I guess.
And it feels like the situation's flipped quite quickly. I grew up, so actually I'm a quarter Spanish. My maternal grandma was a migrant, an immigrant when she was very young, came over here, her family for the opportunities that came with it. My father's side of the family is French Huguenot, if you go back far enough. I grew up near Reading, which was a very genuinely multicultural area where I grew up. And of course, when I was growing up, we were being taught to be colourblind, to see what we had in common, to kind of, rub along together the best we could, and think about the fact that we're all together and all the things we liked and so on. It's flipped, hasn't it, in 30 years, 40 years, from being colourblind to now the big defining features about people are their race, are their ethnicity. It is about sort of this hierarchy of oppression in many regards. And yet 30 years ago, we were told to all get along with one another, and now we're sort of told to avoid one another. I remember as a child asking my friends from different backgrounds things to try and understand their ethnicity, and they would ask me questions about my background. Nowadays, we would discourage children from doing that for fear of it being a microaggression or so on and so forth. So why do you think it's flipped so quickly? So that I'm rambling on it, but what's that flip about, do you think?
I actually think that things are not as different as you imagine, that actually what we've seen is just the volume knob being turned up on a set of beliefs that were already there. And I just want to, so for example, we have had incidents of cancel culture in the mid-90s. I can just give you an example. The University of British Columbia was torn apart by these nondescript allegations of racism and sexism. They brought in outside consultants. This was 1995, pre-social media, and it wasn't the only incident. So there were fewer incidents. Not only that, I mean, I grew up, I don't know, we're maybe somewhat similar vintage, maybe I'm a bit older than you, but you had a big emphasis on the politics of race and gender already in the early 1990s, already in the late 1980s. That kind of the beginnings of this religion of worshiping racial minorities and worshiping subaltern groups as somehow something you can't criticize. I think that was already in the culture, and it just had yet to be weaponized to the same extent it has been by a kind of social justice left. But you already had a lot of these themes present. So I don't think we're living through a radical shift as much as a turning up of the volume from maybe 8 or 9 to 11.
And it definitely feels at times it has reached 11, doesn't it? It's reached 5 to 11.
Yeah. So you kind of went from a high degree of minority sensitivity. We must be very sensitive and respectful around such groups, which was already there in the 80s and 90s, to such groups are sacred and we are fallen, which is just taking it up the level from sensitivity to worship. And that's the difference.
And of course, it's interesting because, when you use the word worship, and you've said that in many regards, some of these ideas are now a bit like a religion. Of course, one of the difficulties with religion is you have ideas such as heretics and apostates, and it very much starts defining people, whether they're within the religion or whether they're, heathens or non-believers. Or do you feel we kind of reached that point now with a lot of these ideas?
I think so. I think that for someone who is, say, a white male to criticize, ideas like affirmative action or microaggressions, which are meant to help groups which are kind of seen as totems, racial minorities, sexual minorities, etc., to criticize such groups in a way, or is in a way to violate the natural order of things in this religion. So it actually means you actually need to be genuflecting, taking a knee, bowing your head to discourses that purport to act in the name of helping these groups, which are in a way sacralized. So it's in a way, the term woke in a one sentence definition is the sacralization of historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual groups. So that once you get to the level of saying it's their lived experience, they've got deeper, more spiritual experience instead of they are equal. No, you can't start saying, we're going to look at the creation myths of the indigenous Native Americans and we're going to ask if they, well, are they in fact invented traditions or not? You can't say things like that. That is sort of a blasphemy, because in a way, the only way you can approach such individuals is reverence, bend the knee, bow the head, etc., lived experience. And so that sort of approach is very kind of counter-enlightenment. It's very much not about falsification, measurement, testing, challenging, that kind of thing.
And so obviously you've done a lot of stuff in recent times about protecting viewpoint diversity and academic freedom. So like, you know, how worried are you about the state of freedom of thought, freedom of research within our academic institutions right now?
I think I'm quite worried. And again, it's anything that touches on the red lines, which are the sacred values, which are essentially around race, gender, and sexuality. I mean, you can talk about climate change, you can talk about COVID, you can talk about things which are controversial, but don't touch upon these identity categories that are worshipped by the religion, right? So once you start to impinge on topics that are even adjacent to any of these things, so talk about nationalism or immigration, you've got to be careful to some degree. You can't advance, if you try and publish papers that show that, let's say, immigration hurts people at the bottom rung of the economic ladder, that's going to be really hard to publish, and you will be a pariah in your discipline, like a George Borhaus, for example, in the US at Harvard. These people are essentially they are sort of outcasts because they are challenging an orthodoxy. So I think anytime you touch on an orthodoxy, or it could be crime, it could be the impact of BLM protests on killings of African Americans. Again, any topic that touches on these sorts of things is going to be out of bounds, or there's only one view allowed. So yes, in that sense, academic freedom is threatened. Now, the other thing I would say also is you have now got the new threat of losing your job due to a Twitter mob and complaints, and it's still pretty rare in Britain. It occasionally happens. It happens more in the US. What I would say, however, is there's been a big increase. Just since sort of 2019-20, there's been a big jump in the number of these cancel cases that are, and this is, you can find this in the FIRE database, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. So there's been a big upsurge in the number of people either losing their job or being investigated as a result of kind of woke complaints. But at the same time, the thing I want to stress is it's not just these punishments, but there's also the more mundane political discrimination, which is simply that anyone who isn't culturally to the left is going to face a lot of discrimination in terms of hiring, promotion, refereeing. So some of the surveys that I did for the report, showed that, for example, 1 in 3 British academics wouldn't hire a known Leave supporter for a job. In the US, it was sort of 4 in 10 wouldn't hire a known Trump supporter for a job. Not actually because academics are any worse than anyone else. It's just that because the proportion is so heavily left-wing, their prejudices are very dominant in the hiring and refereeing process. So if you're an aspiring academic, you keep your mouth shut if you don't have the orthodox views. And what does that mean? That just means your academic freedom is curtailed through self-censorship and chilling effects. And actually, and again, as the surveys that I've done have shown, those chilling effects actually act to keep dissenters from orthodoxy from entering into an academic track in the first place. They know in the social sciences and humanities, academia is a cold place for their beliefs. They may not fit in, and this is something that I did in my CSPI report recently, where I looked at Canada, the US, and Britain, and you can see very clearly graduate students, master's level students in the social sciences and humanities who are conservative know that their views aren't going to fit, and they don't generally, they're less likely to enter. What that does is it reproduces a narrower and narrower bubble. So it's now to the point where it's sort of 14-1 left to right in the US and 9-1 in Britain in the social sciences and humanities on the professoriate. So yeah, you've got to be in the closet, I suppose. Either you're in the closet or you're really out there.
So I think it's probably fair to say you're probably not in the closet on your thoughts and your approaches to things. You're out there. So
That's
there's
right.
two big issues you flag up. So there's the cancelling and there's the chilling.
Yeah.
Like, how do we? Because I think even a lot of people, whether they're left or on the right or whatever, but that believe in this sort of liberal ideals, the old-fashioned liberal ideals, would say we do need viewpoint diversity. So how do you think we can go about rolling back this vicious circle? How do we stop the cancelling? How do we stop the chilling, if indeed it's possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to note that only 1 in 10 academics will typically support a firing campaign. So you don't have huge support for cancellation, even of very controversial speakers. You have another group of about 40 to 50, let's say 40% of academics, however, that are quite tolerant. They're not opposed to cancellation. They're not in favor of it, but they're not opposed. And that creates a sort of tolerant atmosphere. But the problem we have is people work the taboos. The activists work the taboos. They know that's going to shut people up. So they can really multiply. Even though they're 10%, they can generate a big, big impact. I think universities cannot reform themselves because of the way activists they're in committees, they are coming at the university's Twitter feed, they can scare the university into worrying about its reputation, they can use these sort of quote unquote harassment, emotional safety logic. All of these things mean that they get their way. So the only way reform can happen is really through external intervention at this point from governments which are sympathetic to the agenda of academic freedom.
And that was one of the one of the many important points you were making in the report last year about viewpoint diversity. What do you specifically think that the governments should be doing? And are you seeing evidence that governments are, taking up those ideas and pushing on it?
Well, yeah, so the Academic Freedom Bill, which will become law very shortly, is a great start and is really, I think, the first of its kind in the Western world, which is going beyond just saying to universities, you have to have a nice statement about how you support academic freedom, to saying, well, because you have to get into this, to say, well, when the academic freedom obligation conflicts with some obligation around equalities or emotional safety, the academic freedom takes precedence, and you've got to specify that and nail that down. If you allow them any wiggle room, they'll always put academic freedom at the bottom. So the first thing to do is that, and secondly, they're setting up an office in the Office for Students, the regulator. They'll have something called an academic freedom champion, whose job it will be to actually investigate universities and make sure that they are promoting and protecting academic freedom, also allowing people to go around their universities to appeal when their academic freedom has been violated. So all of these things, this very proactive approach is very important for protecting people's academic freedom, giving them that sense of security so they don't have to worry about losing their job, being expelled. Now, that's going to take care of some of the problem, but not all of the problem. I mean, the viewpoint diversity issue, the political discrimination, still going to happen. So how do you get at that? This is where I think the next phase would have to be a couple of things. One is being much, much tougher on political discrimination, so that anyone who's on a hiring committee or any part of the university where they're involved in refereeing a grant should have to sign up to political non-discrimination. The second thing is the universities, the official parts of the universities, in my view, should all be politically neutral. They should not be campaigning for or against any political issue that is not directly concerned with the business of running a university. So Middlesex University, I mean, again, a recent thing, they put out a statement, they're critical of the Race Commission report. That shouldn't be happening. So university academics, the professors and the academics themselves as individuals, they can say whatever they want, be as political as they want, but the departments, the official communication, anything that's official and administrative should be politically neutral. And that too, I think, would go some way, not the whole way, would go some way to sort of creating a less hostile environment for political minorities like gender critical feminists or conservatives.
So what would you say to those people who worry that by banning faculties or universities from being able to take official stances, that is in and of itself an attack on academic freedom and freedom of speech? So, what would you say to people that are worried about that?
Yeah, I mean, people, I think, kind of confuse institutional autonomy and individual autonomy, right? And yes, we want to give universities and departments as much freedom as we can possibly give them. But I don't think it is a sacrosanct principle that the these institutions have their autonomy, because the institutional autonomy can be used to suppress the individual's autonomy. I'll give you a good example. In the American South in the early 60s, Southern universities didn't allow Black students into the university. They operated this principle of segregation. Now, the federal government had to say, well, no, you've got to allow Black students to exercise their right to enter your university if they've got the grades. They have to be treated equally. So the one level of government, the government actually had to circumscribe the autonomy of the university to protect the liberty of the individual. And that's really the situation that we're in now. It's not as extreme as that, but it is the case that the universities are, because of political pressures, are actually not honoring, not protecting the liberty of individuals. And the only way that can be stopped is if the government actually curtails the autonomy of the university to ensure that they are upholding the law. And by the way, this is all in accordance with the law. So the universities are abrogating the law by not prioritizing academic freedom. Now, granted, the law is not as clear as it should be on this, but basically, universities are operating their own interpretation of the law, which sort of puts academic freedom below these other things. It's not as bad as the US. The US has these speech codes, almost all of which violate the First Amendment. But that gives you an example. These speech codes have been in place for over 3 decades. So those people who think, oh, this is just a phase, this wokeness thing, the cancel culture will pass. Sorry, the illiberalism has been in the system for over 30 years. It's gotten worse, to be sure. But these things are baked in, and you have had no reform. People have talked about university reform, loss of viewpoint diversity for decades, and it's only gotten worse and worse. And so it's not going to actually change on its own. And I should just stress that this limitation on the autonomy of the university is not in and of itself a reduction of liberalism if it's improving the freedom of the individuals within the university.
Okay, so first of all, what you're saying is that really it's about recognizing what the law is asking of universities already in terms of putting freedom above other rights, and that you're saying we've had 30, 40 years of this going on. They've been given a chance to sort it out themselves. They haven't tackled the illiberalism that's actually got worse, and hence now might be a reasonable time for the government to wade in and do something more to get them to change that.
Yeah, I mean, the illiberalism has been worse in the US. I mean, with the speech codes, say, for example. In Britain, it's generally been freer than that. But what I would say is that the same logic, the same ideology of left modernism, of what's called repressive tolerance, which is a Herbert Marcuse idea that essentially if you're repressing conservative speech, that's great because they're nasty and illiberal. That sort of logic, I think, needs to be confronted. It needs to be recognized that this authoritarianism is built into the ideology, which underpins the activism, and the activists are in the university kind of breathing down the neck of the administrators. And also perhaps they've influenced a lot of the administrators also buy into these ideologies of equity, diversity, but equity and diversity defined as outcome-based racial group equality. So yeah, it's very serious. I think the only way it's going to be fixed is through proactive government intervention into the universities to ensure that academic freedom is being upheld, that if people have a grievance around their academic freedom being violated, they can take it outside the universities. Because what universities do now is they more or less operate their own, essentially behind closed doors, not very transparent kangaroo courts in a way. These disciplinary processes, which, I mean, I've been through these a number of times myself. They are absolutely not in accordance with due process and the law. They can make up their own, I don't know, yes, they have policies, but how they decide to weigh these policies, apply evidence, is completely all over the place. It needs to be brought under a much greater degree of transparency, and they have to be abiding by the law of the land, not their own law. And that's really all this is about. This is not about people say, oh, this is like Orban telling the universities to teach X and not Y. No, this is the universities applying laws that already largely exist, but are not being applied.
It's interesting that you talk about laws that already exist and aren't being applied, because I've had very similar conversations with people about what goes on in a lot of British schools. My background is teaching. I was a teacher and head teacher for 15 years. And It is very clear, it's written into English law that schools must be politically impartial, and that when they're teaching political issues, they must present students with a range of credible alternative views. They shouldn't be presenting contested ideas as facts. And yet, increasingly in the last 10, 15 years, lots of controversial contested ideas like critical race theory, like white supremacy, like white privilege, lots of the ideas that come under the banner of anti-racism are being taught to pupils as though they are a fact and a given. And actually that is breaking the law. But a lot of teachers, a lot of head teachers are either ignoring the law or they're ignorant of the law. Do you think that's what's been going on in universities? Do you think they've been ignorant of this requirement to be impartial? Or do you think they're just ignoring it because they don't care?
I think they are ignorant of it. You're probably right. I think they can make up their own law. Typically with these internal investigations, it's only when they get to the very top of the university food chain and lawyers may be involved that sanity prevails. But in these initial phases of these investigations, they can say anything. They can come up with anything they like and throw any accusation at you that they like. Because either they have no concept of what the law is, or else they just decide that no, we're in charge here. We get to say what goes. And this is partly where the abuse of the whole disciplinary apparatus of these universities needs to come under much greater scrutiny. That needs ideally to be audited to be sure that they aren't actually overstepping the bounds of the law. And I think it's very something similar now in terms of what you talk about, the critical race theory. Where that's coming in is in these mandatory diversity trainings that are increasingly coming down at us, and maybe even in the future what we see in North America with these diversity statements people have to sign. They try to pretend these things are just neutral. Oh, it's just about being anti-racist, non-discriminatory, but actually, of course, as you say, there's a huge amount of ideological baggage smuggled into these definitions. And at least a ridiculous thing. So for example, in our diversity training, we had these people come in and insinuate that there was gender discrimination in universities and hiring and all this sort of things. And they cited this one paper. And actually, if you look at the literature, there's about 10 papers that have been done on this. That's the only one of the 10 that's found anti-female discrimination. There's been about a couple that have found anti-male, and most of them find nothing. But all of that literature has been edited out to present you this one portrait, right? So this is the kind of game that these people play, and yet that's sort of smuggled in as kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's kind of smuggled in as, oh, this is not ideological, this is just equity and diversity. But actually it embodies really what is kind of a socialist ideal, which is that all racial and gender groups should have identical outcomes. And if that's not happening, we have to engineer that. Well, that's exactly what it was with different classes, but it's now transposed onto different racial and gender groups.
Yeah. Listen, if it's okay, we'll move on. We're going to come back to that in a bit, but we'll move on to some of the questions from the audience now. So I've got a question here from Caroline. She's saying, have you got any suggestions as to what people can do to challenge wokeness, these kind of ideas in the workplace, aside from academia, given the likely risks if they speak out? What advice would you give people in those situations?
Well, definitely you should be, there are a number of organizations like the Free Speech Union, and there's certainly unions like the Workers of England Union that will, that are not ideological, that will sort of protect you. So certainly if you have any trouble, you should contact those organizations. In terms of sticking your own neck out, it's usually better to get a group to do that rather than to do it yourself. It depends how extreme, if you're just challenging. I think in this country, the legal protections are, you have to have cause to fire, I believe. Whereas in the US, in some states, you can just fire at will. And you don't have to provide a cause. I think in Britain, you can't just do that. The employment tribunal will throw that out. So you do have some protections. It's certainly venturing forth your opinion. I just don't know exactly where the law is on that. I would say Free Speech Union and Workers of England Union will know more clearly what you can and can't say. Something like the James Damore memo with Google where he was dismissed. And I just don't know if something like that would be possible in the UK, given the employment law. I think the way it works is if you can demonstrate that you have a philosophical belief and which is why you made the statement you made, and that you don't want to be compelled. You have freedom of conscience, so you can't be compelled against your conscience. Then I think you are on safe ground. Actually, I'm pretty sure you're on safe ground in Britain. Yeah.
Well, there's a lovely big plug there for the Free Speech Union and the Workers of England. They'll be delighted by that. I've got an anonymous question here. What can we do to encourage more viewpoint diversity, or say centre-right conservative academics, to stay in academia, given the chilling effect, given the cancel culture? What else can we be doing?
Well, I think this isn't going to change unless we get a couple of government interventions. I mean, I mentioned political neutrality requirement like that teachers have. I think that should be applied to all levels of administration in a university. The first thing. Secondly, political non-discrimination should be a much bigger issue in hiring, promotion, and all aspects of university operations. I think both of those two things would go a ways towards making the environment less hostile and making it somewhat more attractive for conservatives and other political minorities to decide to become academics. It's still not going to fully do the trick. I mean, one of the other ideas, which is a bit more radical, which I think does also need to happen, is that there should be an equivalence requirement between all measures to increase racial and gender diversity and all measures to increase political diversity. So that is, if you're going to monitor race and gender, you've got to monitor political belief or voting, let's say. If you're going to look at discrimination, you should do it for both. If you're going to look at diversity and take steps to recruit outside traditional recruitment pools, or to set targets or anything you want to do, and I, of course, have my issues with some of these things, but I think there's probably a rationale to wanting, underrepresented groups, to the extent you can bring them in without compromising quality. You should do that. Well, I think this would be, I think universities or other employers, universities should have some obligation, or should have an obligation, to show equivalent action and equivalent targeting for these two categories. Now, what that would mean is, you could say, okay, we're not doing any diversity at all. That's fine, but you couldn't do diversity on just the race gender stuff without touching diversity on the political stuff, because they're both, I mean, the political minorities are arguably more underrepresented than the race and gender minorities. So therefore, it makes sense that these two things should operate together. So that would be kind of a more, I think that's probably where we're going to have to go if we're going to get more political diversity back into academia.
It is quite interesting, isn't it, that organisations are quite happy to ask you, we're before the watershed, so I'll choose the language I use carefully. But they're prepared to ask you what kind of people you love, what your sexual preferences are, the kind of activities you might do in your spare time. But they won't ask you, they'll claim that it would be wrong of them to ask you how you vote or what your views are on political issues, saying that's a very personal thing. Nothing could be more personal than what you might do in your own home or your bedroom, and yet you're regularly asked questions about, indeed encouraged. I mean, the BBC has one of its stated policies to encourage more of its staff and people that work with the BBC to be open about their sexuality. Now, I don't particularly take a strong view either way on that, but if they're prepared to be so bold as to ask people to talk about their sexual preferences, then it isn't a massive jump to say to them, would you also dare telling us how you voted in the referendum on Brexit or how you vote at election time? But that's a big jump, isn't it? That would be a big jump. And do we want to be encouraging those questions?
Well, I think so, because I think right now we've kind of had we have this attempt to kind of create political uniformity, sort of viewpoint uniformity, but in many colors and genders, right? So this is kind of the current emphasis. Whereas I think that if you were to say, okay, yeah, I mean, diversity, okay, I can get on board with that to some degree, but it's got to be diversity in all categories. So we're going to have political diversity as well. If you believe in diversity, that means monitoring, sort of, at the very least, voting. We want to make sure that we're representing the different political alignments in society, because that's, after all, that is a much more serious, arguably more serious axis of conflict in society today. For example, if you look at willingness to date somebody, like in the US, we know that willingness to date Republicans on the part of Democrats, or vice versa, willingness to date a Brexiteer, to have your child marry, maybe people are actually much more politically intolerant than they are racially intolerant. And so actually, if you were really concerned about divisions in society and representing society, this is something you really want to do something about. It was really quite funny. Harvard, if you look at, and in the US, you can get party registration and donations for all staff in your company or university. And you saw that there was about a 250 to 1 ratio of donations to the Democrats versus the Republicans in Harvard amongst the faculty. Now, you might say, well, okay, so we've got this issue of a huge imbalance, ridiculous imbalance. Maybe we might want to actually do something about that. But no, Harvard is absolutely uninterested in any kind of political diversity, doing anything about that. But the race and gender stuff, they're completely religious about. So what I think needs to happen here is simply to say, no, anything you do on the one, you've got to do the same level on the other. And if you're not doing that, you've got to dial one or the other back. I think that would actually introduce quite a bit of discipline into the system and make people think a bit harder about the problem.
Gosh, that really would be a game changer, wouldn't it? In a whole range of ways.
Yeah.
Massive ways.
I mean, it's already, yeah, go ahead. I should say that's this sort of thing's already happening in the courts. So, for example, in the European court, you can't fire someone because of their political beliefs anymore. So it's not just a matter of you can't discriminate on race and gender and sexuality. You also can't discriminate on political belief grounds, because political belief and religious belief, there's not that much distance between these things. And so it's called philosophical belief, right? But already the concept is there in law, and it's appeared in political philosophy. So yeah, I think this is sort of the next stage, I would say.
And so sort of aligned to that, here's a question from Keith. He goes, where would you say that this intolerance comes from? Does it come from schools first? Does it come from universities? Where is the source of these intolerant ideas, would you say?
Well, I don't think, here's one thing. Certainly, I would say neither schools nor universities have a huge impact on the politics or even the philosophical beliefs of a lot of people. The studies that have been done don't show much effect. So I don't believe in the indoctrination thing. What I would say, however, is that the universities certainly do influence the wider culture. So where are students getting their views? They're getting their views from social media, celebrities, movies. So that's sort of the main peers, which again is coming from that celebrity pop culture ecosystem. That's really where they're getting a lot of their views from. And the culture that they're imbibing is that of left modernism, this sort of sacralization of historically marginalized identity groups is kind of the central pillar of this ideology. It's based on sort of victimhood oppression, but a very specific victimhood of certain groups and not other groups. So we're not going to focus much on the working class or people who aren't very intelligent, who we know lose out greatly in terms of income. We're going to focus on race and then gender and sexuality. So that ideology, and it is innately intolerant. And why is it innately intolerant? Because it believes that psychological harm to the sacred groups cannot be tolerated. So once you buy into this idea that psychological harm against the totemic groups is blasphemous in some way, it's a religious belief. You can't tolerate any speech that is psychologically harmful. And therefore you must be censorious. So it's kind of wired in the DNA of this left modernist ideology.
And I suppose, we can track this all the way back, couldn't we, to Gramsci, or even further back than that, couldn't we, in terms of the idea that culture is what fuels everything, isn't it? If you can try and shape the culture, if you can try and shape the ideas that are out there, then that's what shapes our experiences and therefore our views over time. And hence it's really difficult to roll it back, isn't it? Or to try and get people to have the nerve to say what they're thinking. Because like you said, I don't think the indoctrination thing works. In fact, when people talk about that, I talk about the fact that even though I clearly had political views of my own as a teacher and a head teacher, any pupils of mine that have gone on to get involved in politics have all done it on the left.
Right.
And I'm just as proud of them. I'm just as chuffed for them doing that as if they'd gone off to be, a Tory candidate the way I have or whatever. So clearly, I think teachers and academics, we're less good at indoctrinating our students than people worry. But it's like I said, it's around the general ecosystem that we that we exist in, isn't it? Actually, talking about, we've got another really good question here from Matthew. Do you think that the vote at Cambridge University rejecting inclusion and the requirement to respect ideas, do you think the fact that that was rejected, is that a sign of growing concern amongst academics for free speech, or do you think that was a one-off? What happened at Cambridge?
Very interesting. I mean, I think it's not as encouraging as we may think, and it's not as, but it is encouraging. I mean, I think there are, according to my surveys, there is a significant body of academics, let's say 50% or even 60%, who really would support free speech and really oppose cancel campaigns. And I think that's right. I think so. I think you have a significant body of opinion that is pro-free speech amongst the faculty. I don't think it is as high as that vote reflected. That vote was taken amongst not the entire Cambridge faculty. It was a subset, including a certain number of retired faculty and non-academic staff. And the average age profile was quite a bit more senior than the average Cambridge academic. So I think it was not a representative sample, but I think if the vote had been fully representative, you might have got still about 60% perhaps in favor. So I don't think most academics are pro-cancel. What is disturbing, however, is that the academics under 35 are twice as likely to support a kind of pro-cancel position as those over 50. So we're going to have a bigger problem, I think, down the road. And this is sort of something you see in data set after data set, country after country. And I don't think it's something people grow out of necessarily. I think it is.
I was going to ask you about, do you think people might grow? You know how like there's the surveys that show that generally as we get older, we become more small c conservative, don't we? And in terms of voting habits and personal lives and so on. Do you think that might change as these academics under 35 join the over 35 category? Or do you think people will stick with those ideas?
Well, of course, you never know for sure, but I mean, there are a few data points that we have. So one, there was a study done of Smith College, which is a liberal arts college in the US, where they asked the same questions in 2000 and 2016. So like 16 years apart. And you could see that the support for free speech on the same questions had dropped about 30 points to the same age group, same question. I think if you look at other survey series on a question, on many of the questions, the problem is they would have asked about a communist speaking. So no, this generation is not less tolerant of a communist speaking or homosexual speaking, but when you say a racist speaking, then they are less tolerant. And I think that's indicative of the fact that racism touches on one of those sacred totems of race, gender, and sexuality in a way that communists and atheists and other, those questions don't touch on it. And so therefore you haven't seen slippage on those metrics. So yeah, I think we are going to be seeing less tolerance in this generation. I think the situation is worse in the US than in Britain. I think in Britain there's some mixed signals, but I think in the US case, certainly less tolerance in the younger the new generations.
And so there's lots of stuff to worry about or think about, and yet thankfully here you are, you're still able to talk to us as an active academic. So genuine question, and you might have to be careful about what you say, but how comes you're still here, able to say the things you're saying, challenge the very thing which you say you're worried about? How can you get away with it? And is there something that other academics can learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different levels. So very few academics have lost their job in this country. It's the first thing to say right off the bat. It's very rare. It's more common in the US. Now, there's been more attempts at canceling people here. Since about 2018, you can really see an uptick. But it's still very difficult, and that's a good thing. But what I would say is there have certainly been a number of attempts to get me in trouble. I've been through the disciplinary process several times. Many academics I know. If you ask Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, he's got lots of academics have come to him who've been in a similar process. So even if you don't actually get fully canceled, you can still be chilled by being put through these quite taxing disciplinary process, because you don't, especially if you don't know the law, you don't know what's going to happen to me. Am I going to be suspended? Am I going to be disciplined in some way? It's the not knowing. There's a phrase, the process is the punishment. So even though the process doesn't lead you to be convicted, there's still that, ooh, there's something on my record, and ooh, what's going to happen next time? They always want to keep you on the back foot. And unless you kind of are in a very secure position or you know the law very well, a lot of people will say, oh, geez, I don't want to risk that. I don't want to say something that might be risky. So, one thing is to know the law. The second thing, I suppose, is to, yeah, I mean, there's obviously different degrees of edginess, right? I mean, I'm not sort of talking about race and IQ, which I have no interest in whatsoever. But, so obviously there are certain topics, or even the trans issue. I mean, the gender critical feminists are the ones who are most likely to be the subject of a cancellation campaign. So there are certain, I'm not right at the edge. So that makes a difference, but yeah.
So what you're saying is, so in the UK, certainly it's not so much the cancellation that's a big thing, but it's more that chilling, and it's that more sort of the dragging out these processes that encourages people to keep their head down, play by the rules as it's seen as on, and not speak out.
Well, I think the political, being a pariah and the political discrimination from colleagues in your field is a bigger factor than, I mean, not so many people are right at the edge of being canceled. Not right on those hot buttons, but I think it's more the sort of other factors, like, no, you won't be invited to certain conferences or to certain events. People might, I've been in meetings where, certain people won't look at me, right? So you'll get the kind of hostile, cold shoulder treatment from activist academics, or people will try and smear you and say nasty things. So there's different levels of discomfort that can be introduced, short of being fired.
Okay, and then let's try and wrap it up now. So we've covered a whole range of different things, but I guess along the way in your career and in your own, life, you'll have come across lots of people that you agree with, and presumably you'll have come across with a whole load of people that you disagree with. What do you think we can be doing from here to help people, particularly in academia, to disagree better? Forget what the government might say or whatever. What do you think is the key to disagreeing really well?
Well, unfortunately, it's very hard to extract it from government. I mean, you have to reform all of the complaints and disciplinary procedures. So it should be much, much harder to lodge a complaint. Most of those complaints should simply be desk rejected, unless they're likely to result in some sort of conviction. So frivolous complaints, which is one of the tools people use, enforcing political non-discrimination, all of that will make people more secure to say, okay, well, I'm actually going to push the boat out there, because a lot of the academics actually do want to have, or are not averse to having, these conversations. It's a small minority of activists who want to shut these things down and sort of cover everything in the sacred aura, so that if you touch that question, then you are an awful racist or transphobe or whatever. It's how do you isolate and neutralize these activists who don't believe in free speech? They believe in emotional safety, and they believe in bowing the head to these sacred totems, and that you've insulted one of their gods. So how do you actually you have to be able to marginalize these irrational people who essentially worship religious totems, which means that they are on guard against any potential insult and trying to weaponize anything that might be painted as racist or sexist or transphobic in order to sort of gain a rush of moral self-righteousness. So it's how do we design the system to isolate those people, to free up the other people? I mean, that is essentially the problem we all face. And I think, unfortunately, that all comes down to institutional incentives, and the only people who can do it are really government regulators. I just don't think it can be done within the university. There just isn't the possible. I just think because of the way taboos operate, no one's going to be willing to stick their neck out. And we can't really rely on courageous individuals. I mean, you might get the odd courageous individual, but that's not a way to systematically deal with the problem.
So what you're saying is no pressure, but Boris Johnson and Gavin Williamson, it's down to them, yeah?
It's down to them, I mean, down a few rungs from them. It's sort of, Michelle Donnellan, and it's James Wharton and the OFS, and it's whoever is appointed as the academic freedom champion. But then you've got other spheres, right? I mean, you've obviously got media to deal with and education to deal with, and I think laws that would protect philosophical belief more robustly. That's the other thing we need for people in the private sectors to know that they can't be fired for their philosophical beliefs, and the employment tribunals will find against any employer that does that. That has to also be strengthened, I think.
So final question from me then. Where do you think we might be in 10 years' time? If we got together again to have this conversation, you know, we'd be a little bit grey, a little bit older. Right. But where do you think this issue would be in a decade?
Well, we're in a situation where in a way the cultural trends, generational trends are looking negative because we have a less tolerant younger generation to some degree. Although I think that the Generation Z, the very newest generation in this country, ages 18 to 21, are a little bit more sensible. So that could be a positive sign. We'll have to see what happens compared to the millennials, but we'll have to see. But still, I think a lot of it's going to come down to the reform of these institutions, the layer between government and the individual citizen, the universities, the tech companies, and these other institutions need to be sort of regulated around free speech, political non-discrimination, political neutrality. All of these things need to be sort of brought in, and the government and the regulators need to actually be proactive, breathing down the necks of these institutions on a regular basis in order to ensure that these chilling effects no longer can operate. I'm afraid it sounds very draconian, but it's done in a way to liberate the individual. So yes, you're bearing down on these institutions, because these institutions, who started the culture war is in fact the activists who've tried to enter these institutions and pursue politics within them and sort of warp their mission away from, say, truth to social justice. Well, it's got to be pushed back to truth, but that can't happen within the institution, can only happen from outside. It might seem illiberal, but it's actually not. It's very much in the service of liberty, and makes sense from that perspective.
So I'll book you in for another conversation then in 10 years' time. Let's go for May 2031, and fingers crossed, maybe things have moved in the right.
Maybe I'll be retired, who knows?
Well, listen, Eric, thank you so much. That's been a really, really interesting conversation. I've taken huge amounts out of that, and I know our audience will as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And to those who've been watching at home, thanks again for coming along. We'll have snippets of this interview and the full interview up online as soon as possible. Watch out for that on our social media channels. And if you've got any more questions or any suggestions as to who we could get along for our next guest, for our next discussion, don't hesitate to get in touch. Eric, thank you again. Been an absolute star.
Thanks so much, Mark. I very much enjoyed it. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. And good night, everybody. We're going to disappear suddenly in a second, but hopefully we'll catch up with you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.